Okay, and we are live now. So, hello everyone. This is a new episode of Language Learning Lives, a series of live interviews with researchers who are somehow concerned with learners and teachers' lives. So today we have Christian Ludwig. So, can you correct my
Well done.
pronunciation?
No, there's nothing to correct. That was perfect.
Okay, so Christian Ludwig is a speaker and researcher in the field of ELT. He received his PhD in 2015 and worked as a substitute professor at University of Education Karlsruhe
Almost, yeah, well done.
and the University of Bielefeld.
Well,
I don't know.
Bielefeld, yeah, that's all right.
Bielefeld. Bielefeld. Okay, both in Germany, right? Okay.
And Berlin is probably easier.
Yeah, so he's presently substitute professor at the Freie Universität Berlin. His teaching and research interests include enhancing learner autonomy in the EFL classroom, technology in language learning, and literature in foreign language learning. Since 2015, he has been the coordinator of the IAD TEFL Learner Autonomy Special Interest Group and external consultant for Cornelsen Publishing. He has been visiting scholar at, among others, universities in South Africa, Japan, China, and Belgium. So, welcome, Christian. Can I call you Christian?
Yes, hello. Yeah, you can call me Christian, or Chris is enough. That's
Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too.
Yeah, I think we've been following each other for quite some time, but this is the first time that we actually interact. So thank you so much for accepting my invitation and believing in this project. I'm sure we're gonna have a cool conversation right now. So, oh, Siri is interacting with me here. So could you please start telling us about your start as a teacher and a researcher and how you got involved with autonomous learning?
Okay, the first time that I heard about learner autonomy was when I was still a university student myself, and that was yeah, exactly 12 years ago. And yeah, the professor I was working for as a student assistant, he was working in the field of learner autonomy, and he had worked with some of the key people in the field of learner autonomy, so David Little and a couple of others, and then he introduced me to the work of Lenny Dum, um, a who used to be a teacher in at a secondary school in Denmark, and yeah, then I met her at a conference, at an ILA conference, at the ILA conference in my hometown in 2008, and she invited me over, and I saw some autonomy in practice, and I found that very interesting. And yeah, that's how I got involved with autonomous learning. And she was coordinator. She was coordinator of the Learner Autonomy Special Interest Group at the time, and I became a member of the committee, and then met more and more people who were also involved with autonomy. And yeah, I've been with autonomy ever since.
Okay.
So yeah, and yeah, I guess I always wanted to become a teacher since I was a secondary student myself. So I studied Spanish, English, and German as a foreign language, and yeah, never made it to secondary school, but yeah, just stayed at university. So here I am.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, based on your experience uh, in autonomy, with autonomy, and based on my research, I think you're also interested in out of class of course, out of class learning. So, based on your experience, how do you think we could develop learner autonomy in and outside the classroom? And how can we create connections between those spaces, which I think is a challenge for us teachers and researchers in this area?
When you when you look at developing learner autonomy in the classroom, then of course one of the main things is that the target language is not only the object of instruction of learning, but that it's also used for as much authentic communication in the classroom as possible, and that you try to actively engage your student in the entire process of learning. So it's not this typical frontal teaching that many of us are used to, but it's a process of negotiation where you involve your learners as much as possible. So choosing the materials or talk about different activities that you could do, etc., etc., etc. And that's something we know from the literature. That's something we know from research that can be quite effective. When we look at learning outside the classroom, that's probably something that many of us need to explore more. Um, there are so many learning opportunities around us. I mean, English as a foreign language is everywhere, and that creates a lot of learning opportunities. But also, digital media. There's so much digital technology where you can connect with people, and that's also how the two of us connected. So there's a lot of technology that you can use, social media, your phones, etc., etc., etc. And I got interested in out of class learning when I read an article a couple of years ago, and the title of the article I think was "Learning English When Walking Down the Street," about a group of learners in Mexico, and how they used graffiti and menus and other things in English to work with authentic material in the classroom. But nowadays, it's probably digital technology that allows us to work with students and connect the outside and the inside world, if you like. So I think the basic idea is that we give the students the opportunity to bring their real lives into the
Yeah,
classroom. And that can be anything you see online, that can be something you see in your street, etc., etc., etc. But I think we still need to explore the opportunities of out of classroom learning a little bit more and make sure that we connect in and outside
yeah,
classroom learning. And just to give you one example, there's so much going on social media, especially at the moment, and there's so much going on about the corona pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So a lot of authentic input and a lot of authentic material that we can actually use in the classroom. And I think that the fact that many of us were forced to move um, to remote teaching shows us that using technology is very important and very vital. So
yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah, and I'm also interested in out of class learning. Actually, this is, my current research project is on out of school learning. And what I find really, necessary is to build connections, as you said, between in and outside, because sometimes learners feel that schools, they don't see in schools what they see outside the schools. So uh, I think it's a way of making school more meaningful, and in this way it would bring motivation and engagement, and some things that sometimes lack uh, in our English classrooms. At least in Brazil, sometimes students are very demotivated because they think they are learning for no reason. And I think creating bridges between those two, because what I find very uh, bizarre sometimes is that we end up living two different lives, like a school life, an educational life, and a social life. And I think I don't know what you think, but my opinion is that working and exploring more, as you said, out of class learning is a way of uh, blending those two lives. And I mean, because sometimes having two lives is a little bit tiring.
I think one life is more than enough
Yeah,
to is more than enough. But one of the key principles of developing learner autonomy is also um, that we move away from this idea of school knowledge. So
yeah,
everything we learn in the classroom and in the lesson, and that we talk more about action knowledge, so that we talk about things that are relevant for our students and that they feel um, that gives them a sense of ownership
yeah,
as well. So that's very important. But at the same time, building a learning community is also very important, and bridging that gap between what's going on inside the classroom, what's going on in their real lives, can be difficult and
yeah,
tricky. But I think we have to make sure that what we talk about in the classroom is more than textbook
yeah,
exercises and activities, but real life related tasks,
yeah,
projects, and things that are relevant to our learners, to create this, to equip them with this, the knowledge, but also the strategies to become lifelong learners. I mean, that's also something very important. We can maybe teach them how to pass a test, and we can teach them grammatical structures and vocabulary, and maybe a little bit of history, but this does not necessarily make them lifelong learners. So
yeah,
if we want them to become lifelong learners, they need so much more. And I think I think that autonomous learning environments can really can support students in becoming lifelong learners by making them engaged, getting them engaged in their own learning process, um, helping them to learn how to reflect on their own learning, and also defining their own learning objectives and choosing their own materials. And if we can manage that, then they can continue um, learning English when they leave school. But at the same time, learner autonomy is also very important for us as teachers. And I'm not entirely sure about this concept of teacher autonomy, but I'm pretty sure about is that when we leave university and we're done with our teacher training, that does not mean that we stop learning.
hmm
So this idea of continuous professional development, action research, practitioner research, in-service training courses, being part of a community with other teachers is also very important. So
yes. And I think a lot of teachers are realizing that now, because they are, as you said, being forced to teach remotely, and it involves different skills that you need to learn every day. So yeah,
yeah, and one more thing maybe, learner autonomy is very often misinterpreted as learning on one's own, as
yeah,
self-directed learning, and that's not what learner autonomy is about. I mean, being part of a community, but being an active member of a community, that's what learner autonomy is really about. And the same is true for teachers. And
yeah,
now that everyone is learning from home and teaching remotely, being part of a community is more important than ever. So if students learn outside the classroom, fine, but they need learning. They need peers they can actually learn with. They need other students they can talk to. Yeah, so they need that this sense of belonging in a way.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and I think the same is applied to teachers, and we teachers are somehow sometimes very lonely in our day to day. So I think it's also important to teachers to have and now I see that teachers are collaborating a lot uh, due to this pandemic, and so I think it's a good uh, point of this. I mean, that's something we are taking out of it. So something that I really like talking about is linguistic landscapes, and I see that you are also interested in linguistic landscapes. So, how can the study of linguistic landscapes afford opportunities to create for creating meaningful experiences for learners? And how can we relate linguistic landscapes and learner autonomy?
I mean, there are different definitions of linguistic landscapes, and one of them is that a linguistic landscape is any language that you can find, or you can also talk about linguistic cityscapes, or any language that you can find in a city. But I think linguistic landscape can be a lot of different things, as I already said. Advertisements, menus, slogans, um, signposts that are in multiple languages, etc., etc., etc. But also language that students encounter, for example, well, that moves away a little bit from linguistic landscape, but also language that students encounter in video games, or if they play video games. So, and that's authentic language, but it very often contains mistakes or errors, uh, or something is not translated correctly, etc., etc.,
Hmm.
etc. So there are a lot of learning opportunities in linguistic landscapes, and first of all, they can illustrate that the world around us is multilingual. And Germany is turning more and more into a multilingual country, and that's also visible um, in the linguistic landscapes that I can find anywhere in the country. So that's important because this idea of being plurilingual is becoming more and more important, especially with our learners and many learning groups becoming more and more diverse. So that's the first thing, and then B, learners can they can actually collect authentic material and use it in the classroom. And if you have more advanced learners, they can even build activities based on these linguistic landscapes. So you're not using I'm not saying that you should not use literature and the textbook and other things in the classroom. They all have um, their 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 role in the classroom, but it's something authentic and something real. Um, that's number two. And number three, as I said, there are a lot of learning opportunities in them. Sometimes the linguistic landscapes tells you something about the history of a place. Sometimes the linguistic landscape tells you something about the people that live in the area. So if a part of town is very multilingual, then that probably means that you do have a high number of immigrants or
Hmm.
people with migrant background in that area. So it also dealing with linguistic landscapes also creates a certain awareness of the realities that we live in. Yeah, and if you can use the materials in the classroom, um, then even better. And a colleague and I were doing a project a couple of years ago, and what we did was we sent the students to their hometowns and said, you collect any language, any English that you can find. And the students were very surprised by the fact that they found so much English in their direct environments. And, they really enjoyed working with the language and playing with the language. And yeah, so yeah.
Yeah,
It's not
and
about using linguistic landscapes all the time, but that may be a valuable addition to other learning resources.
yeah, and I was thinking about what you said uh, of bringing the outside to the classroom. Because right now I'm not teaching. I'm here in Australia as a visiting scholar, so I'm not teaching. But I wish I were, because I'm thinking about how this pandemic affected our linguistic landscapes everywhere in the world. And here I'm always taking pictures of signs and everything, lots of stuff. But and I wish I were teaching so I could use this material. But
Yeah,
yeah, and I love this concept of linguistic landscapes because I think it's a way of raising awareness that I mean, it's a real, you're learning a real thing. You're learning how not something too abstract. I mean, the language is there in the world. So I really like it. A
and
couple,
that's also, using a foreign language is about everyday encounters in the foreign language, and that also includes linguistic landscapes in a way. Yeah.
yeah, a couple of years ago, a colleague and we conducted a project on linguistic landscapes to see
Hmm.
how, because I don't know if you know that, but Brazil, in 2016, there was a coup. Our president was impeached. Uh, and after that, a lot of protests start popping up on the streets. And we started to analyze how this coup affected our linguistic landscapes and how we could use those opportunities uh, to learn more about the language and to learn more about how we use language and to learn more about how we can uh, use different semiotic modes to build to construct meaning. So I think
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but semiotic modes or, different modes of representation are also very important as we develop our students' audiovisual literacy, their visual literacy. Um, we communicate. Our society is more and more is increasingly image based, and a lot of linguistic landscapes are also related to images, for
mhm,
example. So that's also very important that we can teach our students how to read images and also how to interpret combinations of written text and image.
yeah, and another thing that I like about working with um, real material, I mean, with things collected from the linguistic landscapes, is that you don't work with a pedagogical material. You work with a material in a pedagogical way. So it makes total difference because I mean sometimes pedagogical materials are kind of boring, and I think it's very nice when we have the opportunity to work with real stuff. Okay, so could you talk more about your projects on the use of social networking? I really like it. So, the use of social networking sites as spaces to foster autonomy, and how different it is to see the development of learner autonomy on social media and on traditional classroom environments.
Well, as I said, building a learning community and being part of a community is a very important element of learner autonomy, and collaborative and cooperative learning is also very important. So it's not about self-directed learning, but it's about cooperating with others. So that's one of the tenets of learner autonomy. Um, Social media connect people. A lot of us communicate via social media. You've got, I'm a member of God knows how many groups on social media, and we express ourselves, we express our identities on social media, and social media. What we did was we used Facebook, a closed Facebook group, as a social, as a learning environment where students could communicate with each other, where they could get peer support, where they could ask questions, where they could exchange ideas, etc., 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 etc. And what we found was that social media can provide an environment where students feel safe and where students feel that they can actually connect with other people. So I'm not saying that, I hope we'll all be going back to our classrooms soon, but it is possible to create a sense of belonging and to create a community on social media. And I was moderating a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and that was about learning and teaching in during this pandemic. And there was one participant, and she said that she uses Facebook, for example, also for live videos, for creating content and sharing content with students. And there was another participant, and she said that she uses social media for students to connect with each other and team up and create peer learning environments. So that was the idea.
Yeah, and right now a lot is going on WhatsApp, for example. Many groups are working there, and I really believe that in
We just
this.
need to, we always have to be careful about social media. We know that not all students have a smartphone, that not all students have enough data to use social media regularly. Others don't have access to a computer, etc. But I think it can have, especially with older students, social media, or university students even, social media can be helpful when it comes to having this kind of, having a community,
Yeah.
learning, especially with regard to peer support and communicating with peers. Yeah, that can be a closed group, but that can also be a more open group. And we know that WhatsApp can be used for a lot of different things in the classroom. You can develop students' writing skills. You can use it for storytelling. There are amazing things you can do with WhatsApp or other social media channels. But you also have to be careful, especially as the language that you use on social media is different from the language
Yeah.
that we as teachers expect our students to use. So, the use of emojis and shortened forms and punctuation, spelling, that can all be problematic. But when it comes to social media as a as a as a space for peer learning and peer communication and an additional support system,
Yeah.
that can be really helpful, but only if students see that it really helps them. If they can't see the relevance in that, they're probably not going to use it.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Lots of ideas, and lots of ideas we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about a lot of stuff. Maybe I think we should reflect after this, just to, I mean, digest all the information that we're talking here. But I mean, I'm enjoying a lot, and I'm sure everybody who's watching is enjoying also. Uh, any in a 2016 article, I think it is. I don't know if it is an article or a chapter you co-authored. And in this article, we can find some recommendations for integrating social media into the foreign language classroom. So, my idea here is for you to revisit these recommendations and maybe
Yeah.
maybe see if you want to add, or maybe, I mean, because it is a 2016 article, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so could you revisit them
So
now,
yeah.
focusing on how social media language learning could be a productive fuel during this pandemic crisis. I'm here with your article. Let me see. Yeah. So I think, do you remember the recommendations?
I don't think I can remember them, to be
Okay.
honest.
I'll read for you.
Yeah,
The
but
first one
I'm
is
curious to. Yeah, yeah.
appreciate social media as a space slash place for foreign language use. The second one,
Yeah.
okay, do you want me to stop or?
I still agree. Uh, yeah, maybe stop after
Okay,
each recommendation. That would probably make it easier. Easier. Yeah, I think that a lot of us still um, need to understand that digital media can be a place for learning, and that a lot of learning is going on online. Um, yeah, so I think this acceptance is very important.
yeah.
Yeah,
And seeing,
so I still, yeah.
yeah, I agree. And sometimes we cannot perceive the affordances that these environments provide. And this reflective exercise is important. Uh,
I think it's difficult for us to accept that we cannot control everything in students' work online.
mhm.
We can't be there all the time, and we as teachers we do have this inner we're on this mission of constantly controlling students and supervising students and supporting and monitoring students, and that's something we cannot do on social media, or when using digital media that would maybe be too overwhelming. So, but I would still, yeah, it's still my recommendation.
Okay. The second one is adapt social media use to the learner's needs.
Yes, yeah, I still agree with myself. Um, so I think to find out what the learner's needs are is very important, and that's why practitioner research and action research is very important. That's because that's one way of finding out what's going on in my classroom, and that does tell me. The results can tell me a lot about what my students need, so what their needs are, and again, digital media can be very helpful. Yeah.
The third one, I mean, is really good. Explicitly describe the goals and objectives for social media use.
Yes. I mean, sharing your objectives and the learning aims with students is important anyway. If the students don't know what the goal is, or if they don't know what the aim or the objective of an activity is, it's very difficult to make it their own activity. So I always try to share the learning aims and objectives with my students anyway. And with every tool in the classroom, we should also try to be very explicit about why we're doing this and why we're using this tool. So, just to give you an example, a group of one of my university classes, they're now doing a project with a class from another university, and they're involved in a collaborative
Hmm.
writing project, and they're doing that online. So using a collaborative writing tool, and they said, why are we actually doing this? And then I realized, okay, I have to explain why we're doing this and what the benefits are. They said we could just write our own story. That would be much quicker, much easier. So, I had to tell them that collaborative writing tools can be very helpful, especially as we are focusing more on the process of writing and not the final product. So I think we have to be very explicit about why we use certain things and why we ask them to, I don't know, be
Hmm.
to be. to use social media or digital media in general.
And also, I think for having credit for the opportunity also, because otherwise they might think that you are just passing time, and I agree that we should explicitly inform and describe the goals, so they know that it is an activity that was well planned and there is a purpose with that use. The other
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
the other one is develop didactic approaches and methodology for social media use.
Yeah, I think that's something that is still missing. We've got so many wonderful digital tools, platforms, social media platforms, etc. But sometimes a sound methodology seems to be missing, so
Yeah.
that we do have. One of the things that I very often realize is when I do teacher trainings, for example, is that, or when I teach my students and when we do lesson planning, they find it very difficult to decide what their teaching objective is first. Very often have a specific tool in mind, they've got a
Yeah.
methodology in mind, they've got an approach in mind, but they don't put the objective first, and they just build the objective around
Yes.
whatever else they
The
want to
same
use in the
happens to me.
classroom.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, that's just very important. And for social media, we also need to know why we're using them and how we want to use them. But that's difficult if there is a lack of methodology, a lack of approaches for using digital media in the classroom. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's also something that I insist. Sometimes my students they come up and say, "Oh, I want to plan a lesson using YouTube," but so why? And we're gonna use YouTube with to achieve which goal?
Hmm.
So I strongly agree. Uh, the next one, include an awareness raising component into social media use.
Um, Raising students' awareness is also an important part of developing learner autonomy, and students always need to know why they're doing something. They
Yeah,
should not do something because their teacher tells them to do it, but they should be doing something because they think it's relevant, it's important, it's relevant for them as learners. Um, so it's important that we raise our students' awareness also of the opportunities that social media have to offer. So I don't know if you let your students use a vocabulary app, for example, you always have to make very clear why they're using that. And also, if you have a vocabulary tournament using that app, etc., raising awareness is very important. And sometimes I just use a tool and I don't emphasize enough why this can be helpful in learning the foreign language. So awareness is always important, and you know,
yeah, I
so
agree.
yeah.
Next, use social media tools for differentiated instruction and individualization,
Hmm.
which is very nice.
That's something I still strongly believe in. Yeah, I mean, as I already said, I think classrooms are becoming increasingly diverse, and we cannot use the same approach, the same topic, the same tools, the same methodology for all the students that we have in the classroom. And digital media or social media can help us to differentiate our classrooms and to let students, especially, let students work with other students, connect with the outside world, and also provide materials that are at different levels, and also help us to create a differentiated learning environment and
Yeah,
differentiate our teaching approach. So, and yeah, we're all
yeah,
using I can see that I'm slowly losing touch with my students' social media use. So the tools they're using is not what I'm using. So I realized that, yeah,
Yeah,
um,
we're not.
um,
At least I'm not on TikTok, for example.
yeah. So that's exactly the example I had in mind. Yeah, I don't even know what it looks like. But for them, it can be a learning opportunity, and for them, it can be
Yes.
something they can actually use in the classroom. But I cannot know. I as a teacher, I don't know all the tools that they're
Yeah.
using. So I have to make sure that they I have to raise their awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, of the learning potential so that they can use it in a more differentiated way. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they can choose their learning path and work at their own pace, for example.
Hmm.
Next one, recognize the potential of social media channels. You already said, you already mentioned uh, the potential of social media channels as a support network for learners.
Um, yeah, I think that's maybe all we can say about this. I mean, there are different channels. I don't know, YouTube channels,
Yeah.
a lot of viral videos, etc. Facebook channels, Instagram channels, etc. But a lot of them can be used in the classroom, and I think we already said why. So, yeah.
Yeah, and in real life, we use those networks as a support when we don't know about a subject. We use those networks. So why not? Yeah.
Tutorials is maybe a nice example where we're
Hmm.
using tutorials all the time, and a lot of them are in English. So why not use a tutorial in the classroom? Why not let students create their own tutorials? Why not familiarize ourselves with the characteristics of a tutorial? So with the genre,
Hmm.
and the medium. Yeah.
We're almost at the end of the list. Use social media to establish a community of practice among teachers.
Um, yeah, I think what a lot of teachers are missing is um, a community, an online, and that could be an online community, because a lot of us are doing um, great things, but we don't talk about it, and we don't know what other people are doing. So if you had a social media platform where teachers on a not a regional, local, but global level could interact and exchange ideas and communicate with each other, that would create a feeling of belonging. And I think there, there, um, there's so many webinars and online trainings at the moment
Yeah.
that are being offered, and they're very important. A lot of teachers feel that these webinars are very important for their professional development, but also um, because they feel that they can actually talk about their problems and the challenges that they are facing at the moment. So, yeah.
Um, integrate social media using teacher training programs. Again,
That's I sometimes have a feeling that teacher training is a little bit behind reality, and um, yeah, I would still integrate it in teacher training, and show student teachers or trainee teachers how they can actually use digital media and social media in their classrooms, and just show them how to approach digital media use and social media use. Yeah.
yeah, I think the same happens with learners because we and they know how to use the social media, but they not necessarily know how to use it to learn or to benefit to have more benefits. So I think this awareness this word we're talking a lot about it, awareness, and I think it's important raising awareness that it is it's also a learning space. Um, and the last one is ensure awareness of audience.
Uh, yeah. There's a lot going on social media, but we also, sometimes people say blogs are really great for the foreign language classroom, and we can create blogs with our learners, and we can create websites, and we can put content online, and then everyone can see it, and everyone can, they can contact us, and we can talk about it, and there's going to be a lot of authentic interaction and communication. But we I think we also have to be honest, and say, okay, not every blog that we create is going to be
Especially blogs.
globally.
Yeah.
Blogs is not going to be globally published. So we need, when using social media, we need to keep our audience in mind, but we also have to be realistic about
Yeah.
the number of people that see what we are doing. So
Yeah.
I think that's what we meant when we wrote this recommendation.
Yeah. Because
Mhm.
sometimes when we advertise that we by working with with social media we're gonna have real readers, but I think we need to be honest that not everybody will read, but I mean, and that's part of the I mean that can be part of the lesson, and also how to target a specific group. And my idea in this, when I asked you to revisit those recommendations, was not to see if you changed your mind, but it was just an excuse to read all of them because I really liked the article. And by the way, if you want to read this article, I found it on ResearchGate, I think. Yes, I can put the link here on the comments later. So we're almost finished. So to conclude, and concerning the world we live in now, what advice would you give to teacher educators, to teachers and learners?
Well, I think the something I always have to tell myself is we're still human beings, so we have got our limits.
Yeah,
And the fact that we now teach remotely and that we're supposed to be or teach online a lot does not mean that we have to be available 24 hours. That's one of the lessons I had to learn. And also, we're not superheroes, so we can't do everything. We can do the best we can, but that's it. And we just have to accept the fact that not everything is as it used to be. And I think it's very important and that brings us back to learn autonomy. We also need to find our own routines and accept the fact that we do have different routines, but we
yeah,
need a routine. We cannot just we cannot turn our lives into a permanent home office, So that's something we should remind ourselves of. And yeah, for I think, well, in a lot of countries, or at least in Germany, what educators and politicians are realizing at the moment is that technology is more important than we thought it would be.
yeah,
And I saw a couple of comments from people who said I didn't even have time to get my textbooks. So everything, all the materials, they're all in the classroom. So what do we do now? And that continuous professional development is very important because a lot of us are not trained in using technology in the classroom. That would be remote teaching.
yeah,
And learn autonomy at the moment is very important because we need autonomous learners, and we also need to be. We as teachers also need to be a little bit more autonomous
yeah.
to cope with the situation and get through it as healthily as we can. So
Yes. So thank you so much for this nice chat. I think we talked a lot. I mean, not a lot. I mean, we talked about a lot of stuff. A lot
And
of,
we talked a lot.
yeah.
Um,
It happens to me sometimes.
but thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, good luck with your channel.
Yeah, thank you. So if you're watching this video, don't forget to subscribe uh, to get notifications about the next participants. And I see you on the next episode. So thank you.
Obrigado.
Obrigado. Bye bye.
Bye.